Welcome back. With all the talk of trying to improve housing affordability, let's take a look at the supply of housing in Canada by the numbers. CMHC has studied housing affordability in Canada and estimates that at the current rate of new building, we're set to add 2.3 million new units between 2021 and 2030. That would land us at about 19 million homes in Canada. Unfortunately, that is shy of what CMHC says is required to make housing affordable again. We need 3.5 million new homes by then, for a total of more than 22 million homes. As for how unaffordable houses are, CMHC says they were last affordable in 2004. Back then, it cost people in Ontario 40% of their disposable income and people in BC 45%. By 2021, an average income household was spending 60% of its disposable income on housing. Population increases, including immigration, mean that the existing housing stock can't keep up. For all of Canada, it will stay flat through 2030 without significant more building. And in Ontario, the most populous province, it will decline. To get affordability back to targets will mean a lot of houses. For 37% affordability in Ontario, 1.85 million new homes built in the next 8 years. In BC, 44% affordability means 570,000 new homes. And in Quebec, for 32% affordability, we're talking about 620,000 new homes. Well, it's clear that more homes will have to be built here. How do we get there fast enough, and how do we make sure they're the right ones? Iowerth is Deputy Chief Economist at CMHC. Aled, great to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
So there's a lot of focus on this. You've actually outlined what needs to happen. Are you in any way more confident today than years ago, because this has been a slow-moving problem, that we will actually see change and see the kind of pace of building we need?
I think I'm confident that we're starting to see change. Certainly there are policy announcements in Toronto with Mayor Tory. The Ontario government seems to be doing something. There seems to be some action in Vancouver. And we're hearing a little bit of change in the Atlantic. So it's clear that change is happening. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage, is move the debate away from whether there should be more housing and to the question, how do we do it? This is going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult. But the real question is, how can we increase housing supply by this magnitude?
We have heard big numbers kicked around. CMHC is part of a program. The federal government has committed tens of billions to spend on improving affordability, building new homes, assisting in refurbishment. Is money the answer, or do we actually need to change the way things are happening? In other words, maybe the economics for the developers, maybe what we think about as a fair price for homes. Does something else have to shift in the equation here to get us where we need to go?
Well, I think we need to think about two separate problems. At CMHC, we started talking about twin crises. So there's a crisis of affordability for low-income, vulnerable Canadians. But there's also a crisis for middle-class Canadians in the housing system. So what we're thinking about is a range of policies. Some may be more targeted at low-income, vulnerable Canadians. Some will have to be targeted at the market. And when we're talking about the market, it's not just home ownership, but also rental. And that's why, for example, CMHC has the Rental Construction Finance Initiative, which tries to tilt the incentives in the market a little bit towards relatively greater affordability. Now that program isn't going to have low-income Canadians, but it's part of a package of trying to improve, stimulate supply in the overall housing system.
And we just saw rents, of course, average rents pop above $2,000 in this country. We know much higher in certain areas. Is that just supply and demand? Is that just a matter of building more rental units in this country?
Yeah, and we'll have a more detailed report coming out in January, February. Basically, we're seeing rents on newly available units jump very sharply. If you can find a place, because the vacancy rates are extremely low. So demand is going up and the supply is not there. We need desperately more rental construction. And rental construction for the market, I would say, not just for low income, but just any rental construction would be helpful right now.
In general. Aled, it's great to have you with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Aled Iowerth is Deputy Chief Economist at CMHC. This week, the City of Toronto took a major step closer to paving the way for new homes, with Council agreeing to review and report back on a host of reforms that would speed up and change the way homes get built in the city. That includes allowing for more multi-family units in neighborhoods dominated by single-family units now. John Tory is the Mayor of Toronto. Thanks for being with us, Mayor.
Pleasure.
So was a victory for you. I was seeing it with Council supporting this notion. How big a change is this in the way things get done?
Well, I think it's a big change in terms of the rules that have prevailed in most of the city. Because Toronto was put together out of 5 cities that existed previously, one of them had, a greater latitude for having duplexes and triplexes and so on, and the other ones didn't. And so by allowing this kind of, variety of options in housing in the other parts of the city, I think it will make a difference. And it doesn't mean we're going to stop using 50-story towers. But as I would put it, we had to get beyond a situation where people looking for housing in Toronto had a choice only between a 2-story home, which many can't afford, and a 50-story tower. There had to be many things in between, and this will now allow us to have those options in between.
Including one of the changes you've made is to make rooming houses legal where currently they're in a gray zone. How big a change is that? And importantly, what does that do for affordability for a whole swath of people?
Well, we have to remember that rooming houses, or we call them multi-tenant housing, is an affordable form of housing for many people, maybe among the most affordable you could find. And the problem was, again, in one part of the city, the old city of Toronto, kind of the core of the city, they were legal and regulated. And in the rest of the city, they were illegal and not regulated. So this led to 2 problems. One, the lack of safe, regulated accommodation of that kind in 70% of the city. And 2, a lot of complaints that we got from, because they were operating anyway, illegally. So you had, loud parties and cars parked on the lawn and all kinds of things that come from no regulation and from the fact that these rooming houses were operating illegally. So now by legalizing it and regulating it, we will have a situation that won't change the character of neighborhoods. It will simply take things that are there already and regulate them so that the people inside can be safe and so that we have a good supply of that kind of housing.
Mayor, what some would say is the most practical part of the plan has to do with densifying neighborhoods that are not very dense right now, taking single-family neighborhoods and adding low-rise apartment buildings, garden apartments, things that just make use of the space we have in a better way. Other cities do it. You run into NIMBYism pretty fast. We like it in concept. We just don't want it as our next-door neighbor. How do you get past that in the years ahead when this will actually be put into action?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to be public education. The fear that's always expressed is that by having a couple of triplexes created out of a single family home, you're going to create, chaos and that every address will have one of these. That won't be true. We have to handle it sensibly and sensitively. But the bottom line is the status quo is not an option. We cannot have a city that's growing as fast as this one is with a choice only between a 50-story tower and a 2-story home. And so it will be done sensitively. But there's lots of places where I could take anybody that's watching this and have you stand in front of a place and say, what do you think that is? And they say, I think it's a single family home. And yet, if you look carefully, there are 3 mailboxes and 3 doorbells there because, in fact, it's flats on, say, the basement, the first floor, and the second floor. And so we're going to create more of that. We're going to create what you mentioned, laneway housing and garden suites, which are totally unobtrusive. And so we will be pushing forward with how to regulate and how to allow all of these different forms of what they call missing middle housing. But make no mistake, it's going to be done. It has to be done. It's time we faced up to it. And we're facing up to it. And, I think the results will be beneficial for the well-being of the economy of the city and the well-being of the people who need to find places to live. We want people of all incomes to be able to find all kinds of housing and live in the city of Toronto, not be excluded as they were in the past.
Just seconds here, Mayor, but how soon before this turns into plentiful new housing for people that need it?
Well, we have to build thousands of housing units of all kinds, and we're building thousands now, but this will start to have its impact right away. I mean, the garden suites and the laneway houses are allowed now. The multi-tenant housing will be regulated within about a year because we have to train the people to do the inspections. And the other kinds of housing, the triplexes and duplexes, will be, the regulations will change by year end, and then people will be able to build those if they wish to do so.
John Tory, great to have you with us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Amanda.
John Tory is the Mayor of Toronto. Coming up, final arguments in the competition hearing over a big telecom merger. But what is really at stake? That's still ahead. But first, this. For a small and particularly nerdy subset of the population, something exciting happened this week. Nuclear fusion took a step into the light as scientists managed to mimic the sun's energy by, well, never mind how they did it. The point is they've been trying since the 1940s, and this week managed to produce energy for the first time, more energy than it took in the process of producing it. If that all sounds like fusion has a long way to go, that is true. The amount of power produced was enough to fire up a light bulb. When it comes to practical, large-scale energy, we are still in the dark when it comes to fusion. Back after this.